Chapter 2. Upon his return to the country house in Wiltshire, Lindsey exchanged his morning suit for evening attire, then retired to the library. Hundreds of books sat on mahogany shelves, matched by a mahogany reading table, with an entire south-facing wall of ceiling-high windows for illumination. In the far corner stood a Wargin case full of ferns, installed by Lindsey's mother, the late Lady Althorp, some 25 years earlier. At the moment of Lindsey's entrance, the library's only occupant, apart from the ferns, was his sister. Rowena Althorp, almost as tall as her brother and just as blonde, could have passed for his twin. In fact, she was 3 years his senior, and had spent much of their childhood reminding him of it. Now she sat half-curled in on a settee next to the hearth, her skirts hanging down off the edge and her gaze cast down into a magazine. "How was the factory?" she asked, not raising her eyes from her reading material, nor did she raise herself from the settee. In Lindsey's lifelong experience with her, this constituted a warm reception. "Marvellous," Lindsey answered her. "I'm glad to hear it," she said, looking up at last. "Though I wonder what marvels one might find in a cotton mill." "Oh, hundreds, I'm sure." Rowena gave him a slow blink, a habit Lindsey thought she'd acquired from a particularly uncanny kitten she'd had as a girl. He supposed he should elaborate. "I found it a trifle difficult to hear the finer points of the tour over the sound of the machinery," he said. "Mr. Warren will clear matters up later." "And who is Mr. Warren?" asked Rowena. "The clerk," said Lindsey. "I see," said Rowena, in a tone suggesting the opposite. She fixed him with a queer look. "Are you quite well, Lindsey?" "Tolerably so, I think. Why?" "You've been home for nearly an hour, and you haven't asked after the Strand." "Oh," said Lindsey. "Yes, right. Where is it?" Rowena lifted her magazine to put its cover within Lindsey's line of sight. "Ah," said Lindsey. "So it is." "Do you want it?" she said, replacing it in her lap. "Later, perhaps." "Later? Isn't it what you came in for?" No, said Lindsey. "I'm here for the encyclopedia. Got to read up on textile manufacturing, engineering, that sort of thing." "Engineering," Rowena echoed, her voice flat. "Yes, precisely that. There's rather a lot for me to catch up on." He approached the shelves and began his search. "Now that I think on it, do we have any books on engineering specifically?" "Are you suggesting there's a single book in this room with which you're not intimately familiar?" "You exaggerate," said Lindsey. He drew his fingertips along the assorted leather bindings for the sheer pleasure of their texture. "I only gave the works of Dr. Johnson the most cursory glance. I'm sure there are many other volumes I've not yet skimmed." "If you say so," said Rowena, and resumed reading The Strand. Lindsey found the E volume of the encyclopedia easily enough. He encountered difficulty when he flipped to the entry on engineering. He knew enough maths to keep track of his own expenditures, but this business confounded him. Furthermore, nothing on the page resembled anything he'd seen at the mill. He frowned down at it. This didn't help. Yet he kept at it, long after Rowena had tossed the Strand aside and left to dress for dinner. He was still trying to decipher it when a footman came in to call him to the dining room. Dinner in the country house was served à la Française, at the unfashionable hour of 6. Rowena was already seated when Lindsey arrived, as was his father. Sir Geoffrey Althorp, a tall, thin man of some 60 years, with a close-trimmed grey beard, sat at the head of the table. In times gone by, his thick white hair had been a match for Lindsey's in its golden hue. Overall, father and son bore a great resemblance, differing in only 3 areas: age, athleticism, though Sir Geoffrey had been a ripping sportsman in his youth, rheumatism made him no match for Lindsey's effortless energy, and temperament. Lindsey owed his sentimental nature to his dearly departed mother. Likewise, Rowena's indifferent sarcasm derived from their father. "Busy day at the mill," said Sir Geoffrey, after he carved the roast and dispensed it to his offspring. "Didn't work you too hard, I trust. Learn anything?" "Indeed, sir," said Lindsey. "They're not so much as I'd hoped." Sir Geoffrey gave a sardonic smile. "You'll simply have to go back again tomorrow." "I intend to," said Lindsey. Sir Geoffrey paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He lowered it and fixed Lindsey with a look of icy inquiry. Lindsey hurried to explain himself. "That is to say, not tomorrow, but soon. I am waiting on word from Mr. Warren." "Who?" said Sir Geoffrey. Rowena piped up in her sweetest, most helpful, least natural tone. "The clerk." "And why," said Sir Geoffrey, "is my son waiting on the word of a manufacturing clerk?" "Because," said Lindsey, "he will be providing me with last month's records, shipping and receiving and the like. Thought it would be best to keep an eye on things from the outset. Wouldn't want to do anything rash." "I see," said Sir Geoffrey, in the same unconvinced tone Rowena had used in the library. "I do hope you hear from him before Saturday next," Rowena broke in. She held her chin high, but kept her eyes cast down on her plate as she cut a ladylike bite of roast. "It would be a terrible shame if you had to run out on your friends in the middle of shooting." The shooting she spoke of was to be an informal affair between Lindsey and a few old schoolmates, Miller, Graves, and Clarence Rook. Lindsey didn't think it would be too difficult to reschedule should the need arise. "I'm sure," said Sir Geoffrey, "Lindsey wouldn't miss a minute of shooting for the world." Lindsey finished his dinner in quiet complacency. Aubrey started copying out last month's records as soon as Mr. Althorp left the office. He was a quarter of the way through them by 6 o'clock, when Smith stretched and yawned for the 7th time that day, and announced his intention to go home. An hour and a half after Smith's departure, Mr. Jennings emerged from his office, ready to retire for the evening, and insisted Aubrey do the same. Aubrey hated to leave a task unfinished, but Mr. Jennings stood firm. Mr. Jennings went home by omnibus. Aubrey preferred to walk, though he lived in a more distant neighbourhood. He rented the garret of a ramshackle house, where he shared the ground-floor water closet with 5 other lodgers. All were bachelors, 3 were clerks. Mr. Brown on the first floor was an evangelical tract writer, with a habit of slipping said tracts under the doors of his fellow lodgers. Mr. Halloway, in the rooms just below Aubrey's garret, was a painter. He'd invited Aubrey to model for him on the day he'd moved in, offering a modest sum for his troubles. Unfortunately for Mr. Halloway, Aubrey was determined to lead a respectable life. Respectable gentlemen didn't allow their likenesses to be preserved in the nude, no matter how noble the scene or how handsome the preserver. Furthermore, the paint fumes required Mr. Halloway to keep his windows open at all times for ventilation, and the prospect of standing naked in a cold draught for hours on end didn't appeal to Aubrey. On a typical evening, Aubrey arrived home long after Mr. Jennings had finished dinner. But it hadn't been a typical day, and Aubrey supposed himself a fool for expecting a typical evening to follow. He had made it out of the mill complex without incident when a figure in a flat cap, muslin dress, and standard-issue factory smock waylaid him. "Mr. Warren," said Miss Brewster, a young woman with a sceptical twist to her lips. She had one hand on her hip, the other on the brick wall beside her to block Aubrey's path. "Miss Brewster," said Aubrey, touching the brim of his hat. She removed her hand from the wall and crossed her arms. "I notice you've not brought word of a meeting between myself and Mr. Rook." "My apologies," Aubrey began. It had evidently been a bad day at the mill, and Miss Brewster didn't allow him to continue. "Your apologies? That and twopence will give me a cup of the swill they call tea round here. I'm not interested in apologies, Mr. Warren. I'm interested in action." "I'm aware." "Are you? Because I'm getting an impression otherwise. Perhaps you've forgotten our demands. Equal pay for equal work. There'd be far fewer babes with starving bellies if their mothers could earn as well as their fathers." "Miss Brewster," Aubrey interrupted as she paused for breath, "I am entirely sympathetic to your concerns." "Then why haven't you let me bring them to Mr. Rook directly?" "Because he would have you arrested." Miss Brewster fixed Aubrey with an incredulous squint. "If I were afraid of arrest, I'd hardly have begun this line of inquiry in the first place." Aubrey would have pointed out how, with her in prison, there would be no one to speak for the female workforce. but there were more pertinent matters at hand. A meeting with Mr. Rook would do you no good now. He no longer owns the mill. Who does? Mr. Althorp. Get me a meeting with him, then. Aubrey stared at her. I'm afraid you overestimate my influence. With all due respect, I overestimate no such thing. As the new owner, Mr. Althorp will confer with Mr. Jennings, and Mr. Jennings already bends his ear to you. Aubrey's throat went dry. His mind worked double to talk himself out of his panic. Just because Miss Brewster had noticed the peculiar bond between him and Mr. Jennings, it didn't mean she knew the true nature of that bond, or how it came to pass. While observant and clever, she focused her energies on improving the lot of her fellow workers, not on collecting idle gossip. And just because she'd noticed something out of the ordinary, it didn't mean the truth looked so obvious to anyone else. Still, Aubrey reserved to be more careful in the future. He swallowed as surreptitiously as possible. And now I bend my ear to you? Precisely, said Miss Brewster. One meeting's all I ask. Name a date and time. Aubrey felt too exhausted to remember the current date and time, much less the projected future schedule of a man he'd met not 12 hours ago. But he'd brushed off too many of Miss Brewster's requests already. From the look she gave him now, he wouldn't leave the factory yard alive if he tried to run for it. A week, he said. Let me talk to him first. Get him warmed up to the notion. He's new at this. Miss Brewster considered his terms in silence. Then nodded and stuck out her hand. Aubrey shook it. She stepped aside to let him pass. I'll be holding you to your word, Mr. Warren, she said as he walked by. Aubrey touched the brim of his hat again, and escaped while he could.